So, hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Low Hanging Fruits of Community Medicine. The topic of today's video is intensity of physical activity, and I am Dr. Chinmay Gokhale. Now, many would ask what basically this topic means. So, we will go to the intensity part, but firstly, about this word physical activity. So, in normal sense, whenever someone takes up some kind of physical activity, the commonly used word is exercise. But because we are looking at the academic part of it, a correct word or a better word or an appropriate word or a group of words to be used is physical activity instead of the common terminology exercise. Now, this word exercise has a very meticulous definition. It is timed, it is pre-planned, it is generally intended for weight loss and all those things. I would make a separate video on physical activity and what are the types of physical activities and how is exercise different from physical activity, isometric, isotonic, isokinetic, etc. But that is for some other day. For today, we are looking at intensity of physical activity. So, firstly, the recommendation. Now, many would ask, what recommendation? So, obviously, the recommendation for physical activity for a healthier being, a healthier heart, and a healthier life. Now, it is very difficult to source this recommendation to a particular body because American Heart Association's website talks about this, the US CDC talks about this, the World Health Organization talks about it. So that is why I'm not mentioning any specific source per se, but whatever be the source you are using, all said and done, the recommendation says that you need to do 150 to 300 minutes of physical activity per week. But they don't stop at that. They use these two prefixes to that physical activity. One is aerobic, that is all the physical activity that you are doing across its course. It should be done in presence of adequate amount of oxygen. And the second adjective or prefix is that it should be moderate intensity. And what is this moderate intensity and what is intensity per se is why I am making this video. The other way of saying this is that you do or you should do 30 minutes of aerobic moderate intensity physical activity on most days of week, and in the recommendation it is specified at few places that on most days, obviously ideal would be all 7 days, but if that is not possible, if that is not feasible, at least this much amount of physical activity of moderate intensity should be done on at least 5 days of a week. Now this video is actually very unique, obviously if you are looking at it with an academic interest as an undergrad or an intern or a postgrad student, you would get something out of it, but uh, this is a video even a layperson or a person not related to community medicine per se may get something out of it. And that is why I'd like to repeat this even in the Hindi language, that the recommendation says that you need to do 30 minutes of aerobic moderate intensity physical activity on most days of week, at least 5 days. 30 मिनट फिजिकल एक्टिविटी जो कि एरोबिक होनी चाहिए और मॉडरेट इंटेंसिटी की होनी चाहिए, आइडियली आपको रोज करना है, बट कम से कम हफ्ते के 5 दिन आपको करना है. Now what is not there in this recommendation at what we may discuss in the other video which I mentioned on the previous slide is that this physical activity should be preceded by 5 minutes of warm up, and similarly it should be succeeded by 5 minutes of stretching or what is popularly known as cool down. So 30 minutes, you can say 30 to 60 minutes if you like it. 5 minutes of warm up before that, 5 minutes of cool down. Now moving to the topic proper, how do we measure this intensity? ये physical activity को moderate करना है, पर ये moderate intensity है, ये कैसे जाने? So we'll go step by step. And the first step in that process is knowing something known as the maximum heart rate. And it is a very simple mathematical calculation. You subtract your age, or the patient's age, or the subject's age, or the beneficiary's age, whoever is going to do that physical activity, from this figure 220. 220 minus age is your maximum heart rate. So for a 50-year-old, this HR max, the maximum heart rate, from here on, I am referring it to as HR max. So for a 50-year-old, this HR max would be 220 minus 50, which is 170. सिंपल सा मैथमेटिक्स इक्वेशन है. 220 माइनस आपकी एज. अगर आप 30 साल के हैं, so this HR max would come to be 190, 190. अगर आप 70 साल के हैं, so this HR max will come out to be 150, 150. So that is the first and most important step, HR max. Moving ahead, the second step is the target heart rate. Now, in general, the target heart rate zone is 50 to 85% of HR max. आप जब भी कोई फिजिकल एक्टिविटी करते हैं, तो आपका हार्ट रेट 85% ऑफ योर HR max से ज्यादा नहीं जाना चाहिए. Now, many would ask why? Why is this? Why do we have HR max? Why should we restrict only to 85%? So take it in this way. Suppose you are able of lifting 25 kgs. You can lift 25 kgs on any given day, place, time, season. And suddenly you are asked, oh, come on, can you lift 40 kgs? It would be difficult for you, but maybe you will do it with some difficulty. Then suppose someone asks, no, lift 50 kgs. So it would be extremely difficult. And suppose it is suddenly taken, that load, that weight is suddenly taken to as high as 100 kgs. Obviously, it is virtually impossible. अगर आप सिर्फ 25 किलो उठाने की कैपेबिलिटी रखते हैं, तो किसी गिवन डे पे 100 किलो उठाना आपके लिए बहुत ज्यादा मुश्किल रहेगा. तो जैसे आपके बॉडी का स्केलेटल मस्कुलेचर, वॉलंटरी मसल्स जिसको हम कहते हैं, the way the voluntary muscles have a capacity, have a capability, and exceeding it by large margins is going to be extremely difficult. Similarly, your cardiac muscle also have a capacity, have a capability, which is defined at least in these terms by your age. Higher the age, the capability decreases. Thereby, the formula is such that your HR max would be lower, and accordingly, your target heart rate zone would also be lower. So that is about target heart rate zone. Now, on the basis of this target heart rate zone, the intensity of any physical activity can be divided into mild, moderate, and vigorous. Mild, moderate, and vigorous. So when your physical activity leads to increase in heart rate such that it is less than 50% of your HR max. Now, please remember, again, with full concentration, listen to this. This HR max depends on your age. So it cannot be said that it is 95, it is 100, it is 150, it is 180. What is HR max will depend on your age. And if your physical activity is not able to achieve even 50% of that HR max, your intensity of physical activity is said to be mild. But our recommendation said do a moderate intensity, 150 to 300 minutes every week. In other words, 30 to 60 minutes, preferably on all days, but you do it at least on 5 days a week. Aerobic moderate intensity. And that moderate intensity is defined by 50 to 70% of your HR max. And beyond that, 70 to 85% is known as vigorous intensity physical activity. So if you are able to consistently do this vigorous intensity, then that time interval of the recommendation becomes half. For moderate intensity, it was 150 to 300 minutes per week. For vigorous intensity, it comes down to 75 to 150 minutes per week. Goes without saying that all this is other than a 5 minute or maybe a 5 to 7 to 10 minutes of warm up before the physical activity and a 5 to 7 to 10 minutes of cool down or stretching for good health of your muscles and bones following the end of your physical activity. So एग्जाम्पल लेने के लिए अगर कोई 30 साल का है, so 220 minus age, so 190 becomes his maximum heart rate. माइल्ड इंटेंसिटी फिजिकल एक्टिविटी का मतलब यह है कि उनका एचआर मैक्स फिजिकल एक्टिविटी के दौरान 95 या उससे कम रहता है. मॉडरेट इंटेंसिटी का मतलब यह है कि उनका एचआर मैक्स 95 टू 133 रहता है. एंड विग्रस का मतलब यह है कि इट is somewhere in the range of 133 to 162. Similarly, for 40-year-old, it would be 90, 90 to 126, 126 to 153. For 50-year-old, 85, 85 to 119, and 119 to 145. This is simple basic mathematics. Calculate HR max by 220 minus age. Target heart rate zone is 50 to 85%. And in turn, that target heart rate zone is divided into moderate and vigorous intensity physical activity. Now, before moving forward, it's an obvious thing which is worth mentioning that suppose someone is 40-year-old, he has not done any significant or any consistent kind of physical activity in the recent past, or he has not done at all for that matter. He's starting. He has a health condition, or someone suggested him. He wants to, have a healthier heart, a healthier body. It goes without saying that you don't want him to straight away go to this level of 153. This is not where you want him to start. Obviously, you want him to start as close to this 90, maybe somewhere in this range between 90 to 126, and slowly try and progress it towards this figure of 126. If he further wants to go higher, then slowly he can go on and enter this range. But if someone wishes to get into the vigorous range on first day or in the first week or the first month for that matter, that is highly discouraged. This is not a 200cc bike. यहाँ पे हमको 0 to 6 seconds में sudden acceleration नहीं चाहिए. We are talking about a live heart, a live human heart, a live human heart of a live person, and we are talking about making it healthy. And sudden vigorous intensity physical activity can in turn be harmful for the heart and for the body as a whole as compared to being beneficial. We will come back to this point later in the presentation. So when to measure this heart rate? So firstly, your subject, which could be patient, beneficiary, a study subject, or you yourself or your family member, whomsoever you are suggesting, you should know, or that person should know, the resting heart rate. Now we know that normal resting heart rate range is 60 to 100 beats per minute. Obviously, all heart rate readings that are displayed in the presentations are in beats per minute. Normal range is 60 beats per minute से लेकर के 100 beats per minute. अब ये कब measure करना चाहिए? So best time to measure this resting heart rate is early in the morning. After the person wakes up, this resting heart rate can be taken in first few minutes or first couple of hours. Now, after that person starts the physical activity and after reaching an apparent peak. Now, what is this apparent peak? The person thinks that he is at his or her maximum speed or maximum resistance or maximum, inclination. It depends on what physical activity he is taking. So whenever an apparent peak is reached, the person may stop for around 30 seconds, measure heart rate, which can be carotid pulse or radial pulse, better be a radial pulse. And because we are measuring for 30 seconds and our standards are are in terms of beats per minute, so obviously we have to multiply it by 2. Now those who are looking at this video, those who are listening to this video from an academic interest, I would like to remind you that in a medicine clinic, we generally take a 15-second heart rate and we multiply it by 4. But somehow, with respect to physical activity and with respect to target heart rate, wherever you read, be it AHA, be it WHO, be it CDC, if it is mentioned, they will mention that you take a 30-second, at least 30-second heart rate and multiply it by 2. Obviously, ideally, you should measure a heart rate for 1 complete minute. Theoretically, all this sounds very good. You are running, you are bicycling, you are swimming for that matter, you are skipping a rope, or you are climbing stairs. But practically, how feasible really it is, do you think? कि आप चलते चलते दौड़ते दौड़ते साइकिल करते करते स्विम करते करते you stop, and that too for 1 complete minute or at least for 30 seconds, and you stop to do what? You measure your pulse. You take 2 fingers of your left hand, keep it in the wrist area of the right hand, start counting the radial pulse, you measure it, you multiply it by 2, and then you have to continue the physical activity. So theoretically easier said, practically difficult to do, and difficult to do, on most days or regularly. So is there any alternative? So yes, alternatively, real-time trackers could be used. Now, what are real-time trackers? So real-time trackers are technology devices which are able to count your pulse or your heart rate in real time. So what are the real-time heart rate trackers available? So obviously we have the medical device known as the pulse oximeter. But again, putting on a pulse oximeter and doing the physical activity is a difficult thing. Please remember, please note again and again, I'm using the word physical activity and not exercise. However, in this slide, you will see that word exercise once, but again repeating, Sahi Shabd, at least from the academic point of view, is physical activity and not exercise. So pulse oximeter is again very difficult, but yes, smartwatches have this technology now. There are also bands, wristbands, and others. You have apps in your cellular phone which are able to, measure heart rate. But obviously, these are not universally accessible and universally available devices. The cost of this device can be a potential limiting factor or an apparent limiting factor for many. Now, if someone is exercising in a gymnasium, or if someone has this exercise machine, or what, as I said, we should say a physical activity machine like a treadmill or a bicycle at his home, then these machines have inbuilt sensors, inbuilt devices which measure many things, and one of the parameter is your heart rate, your pulse rate, and from there you can get your heart rate count and your highest heart rate count, which should be in the target heart rate zone of 50 to 70% of your HR max. But again, the availability, the accessibility, the feasibility, the practical application of all this makes it difficult in day to day life. See, this is something which has to be done routinely. Whenever you are doing a physical activity, you have to try to measure a heart rate which is around your apparent peak of whatever physical activity you are doing, and you have to try to maintain that amount of speed or intensity or resistance or inclination depending on your form of physical activity for as many minutes as possible to make it in real sense a moderate intensity physical activity. Doing it once, doing it few times is okay. Doing it daily, doing it routinely, in practice definitely difficult. So is there any alternative? Is there any surrogate marker? Is there any substitute without measuring the heart rate? Can we know, are we doing adequate intensity physical activity? Obviously there is. That is why I have made this video, and in fact whatever I have said till now is generally available in the knowledge domain. It's generally available in the publicly shared knowledge domain. What I'm going to present in the subsequent slides may not always be available, and that was the basic motive of making this video. So अगर आप heart rate नहीं measure कर सकते due to whatever reason, so an alternative, a surrogate marker, a substitute is something known as the talk test. Now again, those who are looking at this, those who are listening to this, viewing this from an academic interest, most often than not, wherever someone says, I want to tell you something new, or I want to tell you something which you might not have heard, we are used to hearing some really complicated medical jargons, scientific jargons, something like a subacute sclerosing panencephalitis kind of a thing. You should at least be required to take 3 or 4 breaths. उसके अलावा मजा नहीं आता. But unfortunately, I don't have any such maza to give to you. This is a simple terminology. Talk, test. Talk means bolna, test means बोलने का test. So what we are testing? So in basically in talk test, we are testing how much can a person speak before taking the next breath. How breathless is he or she feeling? And that breathlessness is a derivative of how hard he's pushing or she's pushing for that physical activity in the midst of which the talk test is being conducted. So again, we have this mild, moderate, and vigorous. So for mild intensity, we were saying a target heart rate of less than 50%. The talk test equivalent would be that the person is able to sing a song, or he's able to have a almost normal conversation. So you go to a park, there are many people walking like a casual stroll. They are having a long discussion, which may be about politics or share market or Bollywood or whatnot. So they are doing mild intensity physical activity. They are able to have normal conversation, just like they would have sitting on a bench, but they are not sitting on a bench. They are having a stroll. Their muscles are working. So this is a typical example of a mild intensity physical activity. But do we want mild intensity? Answer is no. We want at least moderate, if possible, even vigorous. So for moderate intensity physical activity, the target heart rate was 50 to 70%. The talk test equivalent would be that the person cannot sing a song. If while running, you ask the person to sing a song, or brisk walking, or cycling, or swimming, and if that person is in midst of physical activity which is moderate intensity, singing a song will not be possible. But what can be done, what can be achieved is can talk sentences. Or in terms of song, if you want to say, maybe he or she can sing a line in one stretch, then has to take a breath, and then the next line, and so on and so forth. Finally, in vigorous intensity, where we were talking about 70 to 85% of HR max, the person cannot talk sentences also, but can say only a few words, a group of words at a time. So this is how a talk test can be a substitute to measuring your target heart rate. Here we don't have any display. There is no band. There is no cell phone app required. You are talking. Even if there is no one to listen, you can judge yourself how much are you able to speak or sing and in one go. So when you are at an apparent peak, instead of stopping and measuring your pulse, what you do, you may start singing your favorite song. If you are able to easily sing your favorite stanza, then you are doing this mild intensity physical activity. But if you are able to just speak a sentence, just sing a line or so of your song, then you are doing moderate intensity. And if you are not even able to sing a complete line or speak a complete sentence, you are just mumbling few words, a group of words, then you are doing vigorous intensity physical activity. तो इस तरह से टॉक टेस्ट जो है यह टारगेट हार्ट रेट के लिए एक सब्स्टिट्यूट है, जहां पे आपको किसी भी डिस्प्ले, किसी भी डिवाइस, किसी भी ऐप की जरूरत नहीं है. आप जब भी अपना जो भी फिजिकल एक्टिविटी कर रहे हैं, उसके मैक्सिमम पे जब आपको लगता है आप पहुंचे हैं, आप अपना फेवरेट गाना गाना चालू करिए. अगर आप एक पूरा स्टैंजा गा पा रहे हैं तो आप कहीं यहाँ पे हैं माइल्ड रेंज में. अगर आप सिर्फ एक आध लाइन गा पा रहे हैं तो आप यहाँ पे पहुंच चुके हैं, जो कि अच्छी बात है, जो कि रिकमेंडेड है, जो कि जरूरी है. और अगर आप सिर्फ कुछ शब्द बोल पा रहे हैं तो आप इस जोन में फिजिकल एक्टिविटी कर पा रहे हैं. Now coming back to the academic part of it. Now target heart rate is a cardiac function. We are directly measuring the performance of the heart in form of a pulse rate, which may be radial pulse or carotid pulse, or directly measuring the heart rate. Whereas in talk test, we are measuring how much can a person speak before taking the next breath. So basically, we are measuring the respiratory output. Do both of them go hand in hand? So someone may say yes, someone may say no. At most places, it would be yes, but the answer no is also not completely wrong. So, in general, anyways, when we talk about physical activity, for a normal person, we use the word cardiorespiratory reserve. We use the word cardiorespiratory reserve. So, in the same word, we are talking about both these systems, the heart as well as the respiratory system. Cardiorespiratory reserve, in other terms, is also known as endurance. In physiology textbook, or in even in technical literature, you would find the word endurance as a synonym to cardiorespiratory reserve. And in a layman English term, this is what we call as stamina. आपका रनिंग का स्टैमिना कितना है, आपका साइकिलिंग का स्टैमिना कितना है, आपका स्विमिंग का स्टैमिना कितना है, so on and so forth. So for a normal person who has an almost normal heart, almost normal respiratory system, no other major abnormality, no other drugs or any other aberrations, for them these both would generally go hand in hand, and that is in such a person, which would be obviously the majority of people, this talk test is a perfect substitute for a target heart rate. But there are medical conditions, there are drugs where heart rate and respiration output may not always go hand in hand. So there are conditions like tachycardia, like hypertension, conditions with a sympathetic overdrive, drugs like, say, thyroxine, physiological conditions like pregnancy, like lactation. Whenever the heart is overactive, heart is overperforming, there, in such people, the heart rate, this target heart rate, would be achieved much earlier. Similarly, in respiratory conditions like asthma, COPD, or maybe due to an external factor like air pollution, the respiratory output, that is the breathlessness, what we are looking at, may come much earlier. So, in such physiological conditions, pathological conditions, drugs, and as I said, external factors like air pollution, or maybe if the environment is too cold, the air is too heavy, in such cases or at such places, the talk test will not be an exact substitute for the target heart rate. This is something which an academic graduate or a postgraduate should be able to explain when when you are talking about concepts like talk test and target heart rate. Target heart rate is there. It's there on websites. It's there in journals. The talk test also, if you go and search, you will get it. So if you have learned it there, or if you have read it from there and you are able to explain it, there is nothing much, you know, significant in that. What generally is expected, you are able to correlate between such topics and you are able to give expert opinions like this, that when would the talk test would be a perfect substitute for target heart rate, and which are the conditions where this might not be a perfect substitute. So just to revise, I divided those conditions into external factors like pollution and cold environment, physiological conditions like pregnancy, lactation, respiratory diseases, bronchial asthma, COPD, and diseases and drugs acting on heart. So you have anemia, you have tachycardias, you have sympathetic overdrives, you have hypertension, you have drugs like thyroxine, even beriberi is another condition where the heart rate would jump way fast than a normal individual. Moving ahead, finally, a community medicine graduate or postgraduate should be able to gain all this theoretical knowledge and should be able to mold it in his or her own words to deliver it as a health education message. This is something which is unfortunately not always written in books, or even if it is written, it is not focused or it is not explained that much in detail. And hopefully you will take that from this video. So if you are going a health education on intensity of physical activity per se, then first and foremost, you have to tell your beneficiaries, your patients, your subjects, know your baseline heart rate and baseline conditions. I talked about baseline heart rate, which is technically called as the resting heart rate, to be measured early morning, ideally. And we know the normal range is 60 to 100. And you should know about your baseline conditions. The baseline conditions, which I mentioned on the last slide: cardiac conditions, respiratory conditions, other conditions where heart and respiration may not always work in tandem. In general, obviously, you have to talk about that you start any new physical activity in a slow and low manner. We don't want, we don't want to have a bike like performance over here. We don't want a 0 to 60 kilometer per hour in 6 seconds. That is okay for bikes, for high engine bikes, but for a human and for a human heart, the best way to go is start slow, start low, increase the intensity slowly but surely, and have consistency in the increase. For measuring intensity, if it is possible, if it is available, then use the target heart rate with a talk test. And if target heart rate is not possible at all, then if normal heart rate and normal physiological conditions persist, then only talk test can be used. As I said, be it target heart rate or be it talk test, it is not that it is you have to keep singing a song for all 30 minutes or all 60 minutes. Whenever the person feels that I have reached an apparent peak, at that point of time, either you measure the heart rate or you use the talk test. If the results are not within whatever is required, that is, results do not suggest moderate intensity, then basically you need to increase your speed or increase your inclination or increase your resistance. अगर फिजिकल एक्टिविटी के बीच में आपने टॉक टेस्ट का इस्तेमाल किया और आप आराम से पूरे गाने का स्टैंजा गा पा रहे हैं, तो यू आर बेसिकली डूइंग अ माइल्ड इंटेंसिटी फिजिकल एक्टिविटी. If you are walking, you need to walk faster. If you are running, you need to run faster. If you are swimming, maybe you need to increase the speed of your limb strokes, and so on and so forth. Similarly, if you are going too fast and you are not advised to go in a vigorous intensity range, you need to slow down. So that is also an important use. It is not only about moving from mild to moderate, it is also about coming down from vigorous intensity to moderate intensity. And obviously, we started with this recommendation. We will end with the same health education message that try to have 30 to 60 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic. This is a completely different but very, very important word. Moderate intensity aerobic physical activity on all days of week for a healthier heart and a healthier life. Did you find this topic to be different and new from what you already know? Do let me know in form of your comments in the comment section below. If you found the topic to be interesting, please do like the video and subscribe to this channel named Low Hanging Fruits of Community Medicine. As promised, hopefully we'll meet with another video on the same topic, and hopefully we'll meet sooner than later. Till then, thank you for watching this video. Bye bye.